market-based programming is an approach coordinated between the usual WASH cluster partners, such as NGOs, whether local or international, UN agencies, government and public utilities, but also private sector market actors, yeah, which perhaps were not so usual in cluster until very recently. And as part of the multi-sector coordination, of course, it's needed to coordinate with cash working groups. And this is particularly important for interventions such as multipurpose cash, or at least in order to understand to what extent the other sectors are using cash as well. Because cash can be used for any purpose, and as soon as it gets to a household, it gets distributed, people will prioritize expenditure, yeah? And we need to make sure that people are able to prioritize also the cash distributed to cover WASH-related needs. And if you want to read more about this aspect, about the coordination, you can do so in Chapter 7 of the newly published Market-Based Programming in WASH Technical Guidance. You have the link on the slide. The presentation will be shared after this webinar, and there is much more there. So while coordinating market-based programming, the WASH cluster is providing strategic leadership. And this can be done also by setting up a market-based programming technical working group. Of course, it doesn't have to be like that. Market-based programming work can be conducted in the usual WASH cluster meetings, but sometimes because of the sheer volume of work involved, it's preferable to set up a technical working group. And this technical working group can cover a great variety of activities. It can support the integration of market-based approaches in the HNO and the HRP, also in strategic operational frameworks. It can develop context-specific tools, guidance, and technical standards. Think what can be done jointly in terms of market assessment and analysis, or market monitoring, or monitoring in general. Then the group can also reflect on response analysis more at a strategic level to inform HNOs and HRPs. Another aspect in which the WASH cluster sector or sector contribution is required is when a minimum expenditure basket is being developed in a country. And then the cluster can and should contribute by supporting the development of the WASH component of the minimum expenditure basket. So we'll go very quickly through each of these aspects in the coming 20 to 25 minutes. First of all, to look at the bigger picture, in terms of cash and markets integration in humanitarian needs overviews. We focus here on cash and voucher assistance. Of course, there is much more than cash and voucher assistance when we speak about market-based programming. Yeah, market-based programming includes market support and market strengthening on top of CVA. But CVA is one of the most common forms of market-based programming. And there are specific requirements for the integration of CVA in the humanitarian response plan. And because of that, certain aspects related to cash and voucher assistance need to be considered in the HNOs as well. In order to meaningfully consider the inclusion of cash and voucher assistance in future plans, at the needs assessment and analysis stage, it is necessary to implement market assessment. And these market assessments are complement to needs assessment. Yeah, they do not substitute needs assessment, and they usually come after needs assessment. Yeah, they are a supplementary tool that will inform the HNOs in a more consistent way. And then the second aspect is the need to investigate through household needs assessment whether cost is a barrier to access to essential wash goods and services. And of course, this is something that you will find more rarely in WASH technical assessment, but it is something which is taken into account nowadays quite often in multi-sectoral needs assessment. Yeah, these usually collect data on income, expenditure, debts, and of course they give you a general image of income, expenditure, and debts. But that's sufficient to give you an idea of cost as a barrier to essential goods and services, and that of course includes WASH as well. Regarding the integration of cash and markets in HRPs, again, we focus here on cash and voucher assistance because we have for this precise requirements, yeah, from OCHA on the integration. So it is expected that the WASH section of HRP clarifies whether cash and vouchers will be used to deliver planned programs, along, of course, with in-kind distribution, with services and so on, all what we call direct programming. We also need to provide a clear and strong justification of using CVA based on assessment data and grounded on sound analysis. So we see sometimes, we have seen in recent years, HRP sections mentioning the use of CVA, but without explaining how this is based on good market functioning, on a fully monetized economy, and so on. So we want to hear that kind of justification. And of course, that is specific to each and every country. Then we are also requested to make a clear distinction between cash transfers and vouchers, for the good reasons that cash transfers are much more flexible, yeah, and we can achieve different kinds of results with each of them. Then ideally, the WASH section of HRPs should state the percentage of the response delivered by using cash and vouchers, and should state also the number of people that are targeted with this kind of intervention. At the level of indicators, for the time being, it is more simple because we are requested to stick to outcome-based, non-modality specific indicators. So this is very briefly what needs to be done at this strategic level of the HNOs and HRPs to integrate cash and markets. Of course, you don't have to limit yourself to cash and vouchers. You can also provide information about plans for supporting or even strengthening markets. But that's already a more advanced level of programming. So now, normally I was going to speak in general about the role of market assessments, but we are lucky because we have an example from the region, from Colombia, on how REACH worked together with the WASH sector there and implemented a market assessment for the sector. So over to REACH, and I will ask Angie to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Dana. Do you hear me well? Okay, well, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Angie Martin. I am joined on this webinar by my colleague Lina Camperos. Thank you so much again for the invitation to present during this webinar. Today, we'll be talking about some lessons learned and recommendations from a WASH market assessment that was conducted in Colombia by REACH. And for those who are not familiar with REACH, we are a humanitarian initiative specializing in information management and assessment activities in collaboration with interagency coordination platforms to inform humanitarian responses and decision making. So firstly, I'm going to present briefly this WASH market assessment, and after which Lina will discuss 3 key lessons learned and recommendations from our experience of conducting this assessment. So at the end of the last year and the beginning of this year, we conducted a WASH market assessment in collaboration with the Colombian WASH cluster. The main objective of this assessment was the onset of the COVID pandemic, which highlighted the lack of information on the impact this event will have on WASH markets, considering that situations such as quarantines, mobility restrictions, and changes in the demand for WASH products would occur. And we don't have at that moment information. We didn't have. Thus, in collaboration with the back-to-back WASH cluster, the decision was taken to carry out the assessment in 2 departments of Colombia in 3 different locations within this department, as you can see in the map. So the first department was Norte de Santander, where 2 different collection processes were carried out, one in the area of Catatumbo and the other in the metropolitan area of Cúcuta, that is the capital of the department of Norte de Santander. In particular, this department was chosen because of its history of internal armed conflict and the migratory crisis generated by being the department with one of the main entries of Venezuelans into Colombian territory. And La Guajira, that is in the north of Colombia, was chosen because it is a department within seasonal risk related to natural disasters, and like Norte de Santander, a department with a large influx of migrants and also located on the border, as you can see also in the map with Norte de Santander. It is important to bear in mind that the back-to-back WASH cluster prioritizes departments that are doubly affected, both in terms of conflict and WASH needs. And for this reason, the main criteria taken into account were access, the capacity of local clusters, and the crisis that they were facing at the moment. This results in an urgent need for information and the main purpose of this assessment. In terms of the selection of products and services, through this collaborative process, WASH products and services of interest to be assessed were selected, and which result in the assessment of markets that capture 3 types of products and services. The first one was the everyday household cleaning products. The second one was the product for COVID prevention. And finally, the third one was the sanitary and water services. The next one, please. Okay, so based on this selection of products and services, the use of secondary information, and in collaboration with the cluster, 3 different tools were designed for each of the population groups defined as being of interest, and because they will giving us a different point of view of the situation. So for consumers, the following areas of focus were assessed. So we focused on household wash needs and vulnerabilities, how households were accessing the market, the changes in consumption patterns, the difficulties that households were facing and coping mechanisms, wash facilities and infrastructure in households, especially like the physical infrastructure of the house, and household disinfection and hygiene habits. For traders, the areas of focus include indicators related to shortages and restocking problems, main suppliers, who were their main suppliers, changes in prices at the moment of selling, and consumption trends in terms of how traders look at that moment, the change of the consumer consumption trends. And finally, for service providers, we were trying to look information or to look for information in terms of primary water sources for the service providers of water, changes in consumption trends, changes in prices, and the perspective of service providers as consumers of products that were needed to provide the service. Because we have two different groups of products, one for the consumers and one other group for the service providers. Afterwards, we conduct primary data collection in person in each of the localities, managing to collect data in 2 departments, in 3 different locations, in 11 municipalities, and we interviewed 551 consumers, 212 traders, and 49 service providers. The next one, please. And so after collecting the data, it was cleaned and analyzed, and this information was then presented to the local and national wash cluster. And finally, we finished with 2 workshops focusing on a market-based programming. In the case of La Guajira, this was carried out in person and in coordination with the cash working group there in Rio Hacha, that is the capital of La Guajira. We also carry out an exercise during the workshop of mapping the water market in one of the municipalities of the department, which you can see in the screen that it was exactly the products that we had in the workshop, exactly as they did it. And in Norte de Santander, we provide an introduction to market-based programming with an online workshop. So this was the broad outline of the process we undertook, and my colleague Lina will now tell you about our lessons learned from this process and some recommendations based on these lessons.
So thanks, Angie, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So yes, after this walkthrough assessment, I will walk you through the lessons learned. So first, what we learned from this experience was the importance of delineating the scope of the assessment properly. So as you saw on the description Angie did from the assessment, we found there was a huge gap both for wash needs and the market aspects. And this led us to define very ambitious objectives from the assessment as the tool to respond to these ambitious objectives. So we had the tools, as you saw on the list Angie mentioned, that aim to measure both vulnerability and market functionality at the same time. And as it was noted by Dana on her presentation, it was very clear that first, need assessments have to feed into the design of the wash market assessment and had ideally to happen before, or had happened before even the market assessment is planned. And also, definitely, it's ideal to scope the assessment to very critical markets instead of aiming to cover all of them. So our recommendations specifically are the market assessment design should focus on on this next 4 steps. So first, divide carefully needs and market assessment, avoiding these that happen, that the market assessment aim to cover both components, and ideally the need assessment has to happen before. This is joined to the second one, which is always conduct analysis of secondary information, which was something we did, and we found this like huge gap. However, well, the secondary information will give you more information about the needs and allow you to go with the third step, which is the identification of these critical markets for the products and services to be assessed through assessment. And this, as I mentioned before, these three last steps will feed into the design of the WASH market assessment in the end. As a second lesson learned, next slide, please. Do not assume everyone knows about market assessment. So we found here like two aspects. One is like not everyone in the WASH programming is familiar with the programmatic opportunities that present market-based programming, as well that there are gaps like in understanding and knowledge about how to link the market assessment to the WASH programming in the end. So our recommendations, and that is in the end why we joined with the cash working group, and we also like held these workshops, was like more market-based programming capacity building for local and national teams. So like this webinar, for example, or trainings or any other kind of workshop in general that give us some familiarity to both clusters, like might help and in terms of program, and will bring all of these opportunities in a programmatic level. And also these workshops that we conduct following data collection to provide more engagement and interaction with data, and to connect and link why was the market assessment conduct, and then to explore the link on the programmatic needs. And as a third lesson learned, thanks. This communication between the local and the national partners, it's key. So what happened basically on the assessment was that some cultural and contextual aspects were only partially included on the data collection tools due to some gaps in this communication between the local and the national partners. Basically, to like kind of dumb this down to an example, on the right side, you can see basically what we found was like more than 50% of the households interviewed in La Guajira report not having a hand washing, like a traditional hand washing structure or facility. But when we did like this workshop and this joint analysis, we found that in a local level, there were other non-traditional hand washing facilities that were as acceptable and as that didn't represent any vulnerability for the population. And for us at the beginning, at a national and from the assessment perspective, was like a flag in terms of vulnerability, when in the end, in a local level, it was a common practice. So our recommendations here is like to maintain consistency between the conversation with partners, both national and local. As you saw, for example, we received feedback from national and local teams on the tool. But anyway, like this conversation has to happen iteratively. So why to keep this consistency? First, to identify common local WASH practices, to adapt the data collection tools to the different contexts, both national and local, and to build capacity as well and knowledge in the market-based programming and market assessment at a local and a national level to facilitate the common understanding of this, which like basically leads again to the second lesson learned, and it's like this conversation between the local and the national level also allows to link why at the national level was decided to or was prioritized to do a market assessment, and how it comes to work or to be useful for the programmatic level. And our second recommendation on this aspect is like to do this joint design and analysis, both with partners, field teams, cluster members, and also the community, in order to have all perspectives and to fit well the tools and the analysis in the end. And that's all from our side. On the next slide, you will see the three main outputs from the three assessments that Angie already walked us through. And thanks so much. There are questions as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Lina and Angie. In the interest of time, I propose that we take questions for this presentation, also for the overall presentation after I finish the presentation. Regarding the links, I want to emphasize that the last slide presented by Rich colleagues includes actually hyperlinks. Yeah, all those images, you can click on them and they will take, the hyperlink will take you to the actual report. So I'm aware that we are running a bit behind time. So I will do my best to shorten the second part of my presentation. And I hope we can run a bit like maximum 5 minutes into the question and answer time. So after having gone through the needs assessment and market assessment and analysis phase, the ground is set for conducting response analysis as an intermediate step that would inform what goes into the HRP. Of course, as we speak about market-based programming, a lot of the responses that are possible depend on the capacity of the market system, disruption, and links. And you have here a few key resources that can give you more details about how market response analysis for a market-based programming type of response is conducted. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here, I think we have some key questions that we need to ask ourselves during response analysis, mainly about the availability of items on the market, then the accessibility of this market and items by all gender and group, about what the level of the prices tells us, and so on. Yeah, and usually we end up, especially at sector level, by selecting a combination of market and non-market based modalities to achieve WASH humanitarian outcomes. So next slide, please. I'll go very quickly through the possible response options when we decide to do market-based programming. So the main response options are three. One is using the market, and this usually means cash and voucher assistance. Then the second one is supporting the market, and the third one is strengthening the market. You will see there is a clear difference between the last two, although at language level, sometimes it's not so obvious. I will again focus on the first option, using markets through cash and voucher assistance. And you have here a table which presents in such a in quite a detailed way what is cash and voucher assistance and what is not. Note, however, that under the column which says what is not, you have in fact some forms of market support mainly. Yeah, so all what is in the table is market-based programming. On the left, you have cash and voucher assistance. On the right, you have market support. So when considering the cash and voucher option, the key concern is to find out whether it's really feasible to use cash and vouchers. And in order to understand that, we need to find out if the markets are able to provide the goods and services that we want to cover with cash and vouchers. We want to know if our target group can access the markets, even physically. We have to get an idea whether prices are likely to remain stable during the response, and so on and so forth. Yeah. I'm not going into the details. I just want to remind you again that for a broader discussion on this, you can go to the newly available guidance on market-based programming, for which the link was shared in the chat box earlier by Nicole. Next slide, please. So I wanted to include this decision tree. It's a very simple decision tree, which gives you an idea whether market-based programming in general is possible in your context. And for that, you need to ask yourself a number of very simple questions. The first being if the market system worked well before the emergency. If no, then for sure you will have to favor direct intervention. But if yes, you can go ahead and ask yourself whether the market system would continue to respond well even after the emergency, yeah? Or if some more demand is created. If yes, then of course you can use cash and voucher assistance. If not, you can still ask yourself if the market system constraint could be resolved or overcome in good time. And if yes, you can go for providing market support, usually. Based on that, also cash and voucher assistance will eventually become possible. However, if you don't think that the market system constraint can be resolved, then you either go into more detailed market system analysis, but if the time doesn't allow, then definitely you will have to use direct in-kind assistance. Next slide. Yeah, so still for the cash and voucher assistance, it's possible to consider multi-purpose cash assistance, which covers also WASH-related needs. But in order to contribute to multi-purpose cash assistance, we usually need a minimum expenditure basket, which is a definition of what a household requires to meet its basic needs on a regular or seasonal basis and its average cost. Yeah. And I'm not going now in detail into the minimum expenditure basket role, but the main reason why we are talking about it now is that it serves as a basis for calculating the transfer value for multipurpose cash. And for this reason, it is important for the WASH sector to get involved in the development process of the minimum expenditure basket. Just very quickly, I wanted to highlight that there are different methodologies for developing the minimum expenditure basket. And these are the expenditure-based approach, the right-based approach, and the hybrid approach, which combines the first two. And in each of the cases, there are very strong reasons for the WASH sector and WASH cluster to get involved. Again, in the interest of time, I would like to go ahead with the presentation and go very quickly through a few options of supporting markets. And here I just want to say that during emergencies, traders are also affected. Yeah, so sometimes their stocks of wash-related goods are destroyed, and they do not have the necessary funds to renew their stocks or even to rebuild their warehouses. And that's why one of the very classic market support interventions is to support the traders to get again financing, yeah, and to get again their business running. Then there are also some other forms of market support, mainly on the supply side, meaning, for example, capacity building and technical support to market actors, or supporting their functionality in other ways. Yeah, I am not going to insist a lot on this. Next slide, please. The main difference with the market strengthening is that market strengthening interventions are usually longer term interventions, and they are usually possible even with either with a development angle or in a protracted crisis. And they usually mean developing new service delivery models, improving policy, regulatory and financing environments, doing social marketing, and so on and so forth. Next slide. Whatever you do with markets, yeah, whether you decide to just use them or you decide to support them or strengthen them, a key aspect is market monitoring, because markets are dynamic systems. So you should check regularly whether the initial assessment findings or your initial planning assumptions still hold. And you also have to check whether the response is causing unintended consequences. Sectors are very well placed for this, because a lot of the market monitoring can be done jointly at the sector level. And we have very good examples here from Yemen and Somalia on how WASH was included in these joint market monitoring initiatives. Next slide. I just want to remind you all how important it is for the clusters to monitor from now on the use of cash and voucher assistance by cluster partners. There are some minimum requirements which you can find in the links embedded in this slide. Next slide. And last but not least, I wanted to point you to a number of key resources that have become available at the global level this year. One is this big evidence building study, then the guidance, again, a tip sheet on how to integrate cash and markets into HNO and HRPs. Also the market-based programming WASH database, in which you have a big number of program documentation on market-based programming of all types in the WASH sector, and also a webinar we did last year in collaboration with ProWash and CALP. And with this, I thank you and hand over to Julie. Julie, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Dana, for your great presentation. So now we'll take questions and answers, and we'll take questions and provide answers. If we don't have time to answer to you during this webinar, please drop your question in the chat and we'll get back to you in a wrap-up email in a few coming days. So yeah, is there any questions or thoughts you'd like to share about cash transfers and market programming? We have about 10 minutes, so the floor is all yours. Feel free to turn on your camera if you want to have a discussion. David, you have your hand raised.
Hi guys, sorry, I'm going to keep the camera off. My connection's a little bit unstable. Very interesting, the presentations and the experiences with cash and vouchers, and also the experiences of Reach in Colombia. In Venezuela, we've run into some troubles from a political sense in terms of cash and vouchers. Nonetheless, we've been advancing with the cash working group on that front, and also with the definition of a minimum expenditure basket. What we are looking for are examples or strategies of intervention to reinforce the market. For example, to give you one concrete example, we are aware that in Venezuela, there are a lot of private water providers, or say providers who potabilize water and sell them in those 20-liter containers. What we do not have is a clear strategy of intervention on how to support those types of providers. It's clear that we can support in terms of cash and vouchers access, but what we're missing are the strategies of intervention in terms of actually improving the quality of the service that's provided. We have a similar thing with relation to desludging and virtually all wash services. And so we'll greatly appreciate any examples that might be available through the Global Wash Cluster. And with regards to Julie's first mention, we would be looking for further support on this specifically. Thank you. Over.
Great, thanks very much, David. I mean, this is quite an interesting question, and indeed we can have a bilateral also with Dana to discuss this. So I can share some experience I had with this in Haiti, actually. We wanted to involve water vendors, so exactly private kiosks. They treat the water with reverse osmosis, for example. We have issues with the quality, and we tried to implement some standard operating procedures to make sure the quality was okay. But actually, this went back, and that was quite interesting, to the Ministry of Commerce, because they were the ones regulating the market and the quality of the water that was sold there. So that could be something you could look into. And also, I mean, the usual capacity building on water quality, but that's the problem is it needs to be taken on at national level, and it's not something we can do one by one unless you target a very small area. But yeah, it's a political issue actually. That's what I wanted to just raise. But we can have more conversation on this. I'm happy to discuss deeper. Sunny, you had a question?
Yeah, it's less of a question, maybe more of a comment. And also inviting Harrison to speak if he's willing to. But you know, we started discussing this market assessment idea with Reach early on in the when the COVID crisis happened, and I know Reach is also working in Venezuela. And it's interesting to see from a regional point of view two very opposite situations, where in Colombia, you know, we were seeing, I mean, the market assessment idea came from, you know, an absence of a supply, you know, a lack of supplies and high costs, etc. And on the other hand, in Honduras, where there was also a market assessment done, but more at a multi-sectoral level, we saw rather the opposite, that at least for wash, the supply chain was really solid, that even if the supply chain was stressed, there were mechanisms to get additional supplies in the country. And you know, the recommendations were almost the opposite, but I think there were challenges at cluster level in Honduras to move the cash agenda and to utilize that strong supply chain that existed. And so, I mean, I don't want to put Harrison on the spot, but just to highlight that, yeah, we have, you know, very sort of opposite situations, and that the market assessments are useful in addressing the strategy of the cluster, but sometimes we meet political, managerial challenges that limit the WASH cluster ability to adopt more progressive market and cash-based programming strategies. I don't know, Gerson, if you want to add more to the context of Honduras. Valentin was unable to come. Valentin is the cluster coordinator from Colombia who worked very closely with Naina and Angie, etc. And again, congratulations on the great presentation and great work you guys did in Colombia. Yeah, maybe Gerson doesn't want to come in, but yeah, just a comment and congrats and thanks for bringing this agenda at cluster level.
I just have a question, Sunny. So I understand, sorry, I missed a bit, maybe you said the supply chain and market assessments were there, but what are the political challenges really that prevents the cluster from, if you can say?
Well, maybe Gerson can speak of it better, but
I think
there were challenges of getting partners to roll out cash-based interventions. I think there are challenges within UNICEF in doing cash-based interventions in a context where there is a social protection mechanism by the government to deliver on cash-based programming from a government point of view, so to avoid duplication. So I think the discussion goes even beyond WASH, and it goes on partnership level, it goes on managerial level, but I think Gerson will be better placed to develop a bit further. He just might be a bit shy to do that.
Gerson just raised his hand.
Yeah.
Oh, great, Gerson, come on.
The floor is yours.
Hola, buen día. Gracias, Suni, gracias a los y las colegas por esta excelente presentación. Sí, en el caso de Honduras, el análisis del cash working fueron dos etapas, una durante el COVID y otra para las tormentas tropicales ETA y OTA. Entonces marcaron dos escenarios distintos. Cuando en la parte de la etapa del COVID, la dinámica era muy diferente porque habían recursos financieros, pero era difícil movilizarlos por las transferencias bancarias, porque había restricción de movilidad de las personas, en el caso del COVID por las cuarentenas. Entonces la disposición era llevar los recursos hasta los sitios o hacerlo por cupones en las zonas de mercado locales. Luego con las tormentas tropicales, después de las tormentas tropicales, la dificultad en este momento era poder llegar o acceder a las zonas que estaban inundadas o las personas que no había acceso a pequeños mercados locales. Entonces había que movilizar los insumos desde otras zonas hasta las localidades. Por lo cual el tema de los vouchers o las transferencias bancarias también se hacía dificultoso. Estas son bueno, más que experiencias, era como las consultas a cómo nos enfrentamos a esos retos cuando el tema de transferencias bancarias se limita. En el caso de los mercados locales en Honduras, unas compañías telefónicas de telefonía celular tienen las opciones de poder hacer esas pequeñas transferencias monetarias, y eso en algún momento se utilizó, hacer esas pequeñas transferencias bancarias a través de redes de celulares en mercados informales o pequeños mercados que en Honduras les llamamos pulperías o mercaditos. Respecto a los insumos WASH, el problema que tuvimos también fue la carencia de estos insumos y se empezaron a elevar los costos, ¿no? Se encarecieron los insumos, entonces se elevaron los costos y el bono, se tenía que reformular el valor del bono. Entonces era muy dinámico, como lo mencionaron anteriormente, esta dinámica de mercado. Y bueno, esa es la experiencia que puedo mencionar de Honduras. Y en cuanto a los temas políticos y estratégicos, era más porque en su momento, cuando hay campañas políticas, tiende a verse como si fuera un bono del Estado, por ejemplo, y tiende a verse desde esa asistencia no tanto humanitaria, sino más bien temas políticos. Y eso era uno de los cuidados que tenían las ONGs para la implementación de esas acciones. Gracias, cambio.
Muchas gracias, Erson. Dana, you want to react on this, or?
I have very quickly two remarks. First of all, in general, for those of you who are looking for examples of certain types of market-based programming, I recommend to go through the evidence building study, which is mentioned on the last slide of my presentation. This study was finalized in December last year, and it goes very, very systematically through all kinds of market-based programming in the WASH sector. Yeah, and it consists of several reports. In fact, that's why we are calling it the study. It has one report for each WASH subsector. Yeah, and yeah. Regarding the existing social protection programs, I think the main message we want to pass here is that yes, where these social protection systems exist, we usually want humanitarian organizations to look at it and see if it can be used for delivering humanitarian cash. And we know that it is not always possible, and in certain situations it is quite complicated to advocate for a parallel system. Yeah, but keep in mind that sometimes this can be used actually. And I will stop here because I know that we have to move to group work.
Thanks very much, Dana. Indeed, let's move to some group works. So you will be directed to a breakout room, and then there's a link that will appear in the chat box. So click on the link, it will take you to a Jamboard, and the Jamboard is made of several boards, and click, click, click until you find your country. And when you find your country, stay there. And then there are two questions for you there. One about the challenges you have in your country about implementing cash transfer and market-based programming. And the other question that we'd like you to think about is what are actually the enabling factors that you may have in the country, and maybe you haven't explored them all. So this is just to launch a reflection. We're not here to solve the MBP programming, the market-based programming issues in 20 minutes. But it's interesting for us at Global WASH Cluster level to see your challenges and what are the options we could explore. And then I'll be happy to reach out to you individually and discuss this further. So we're just planting seeds here and launching a discussion. So make sure then you have a person assigned in the group in each breakout room to bring the key points in plenary, although given the time, I'm not sure we'll have sufficient time to do a plenary session. But anyway, think of someone who could lead if we have further questions on the boards. Thank you. So the link is in the board. Thank you very much, Nicole, for that. And every room is assigned to country again. So follow the Jamboard and find your country. If you can see now, the room and countries are displayed on the screen. We put Cameroon and Angola together and Kenya and Uganda together, but try to keep the reflection at your level, although you can exchange some issues you may have in common. Is it clear? Do you have any question on this? Yes. Oh, no, I think, Gerson, you still have your hand raised, but I think this is from before. All right. If no further question, let's break out.
No, disculpa. Ahora
va. We can break out in rooms and proceed to the work group. Thank you. Hi, hello, everybody. Is everyone back from the breakout rooms? I see few people. So we looked at the at your Jamboard, and I think there was some quite interesting comments, especially about the challenges that you've missed, that you're missing. I mean, you're meeting, sorry. And I see that some of you could benefit from maybe some more information on market-based programming. Just so you know, we have a training coming up. It's an online training. It's 8 weeks, but we can see how you would like to register. It's going to be in English mostly, but we can have a translation if necessary. So if that's the kind of support you would need, please feel free again to reach out to us. If there's anyone who would like to raise a particular point, please, we have a few minutes to hear some of your main concern. We had mostly participation from the Latin American region. Venezuela, very active discussion, I suppose, given the number of comments. Honduras and Colombia. And I think there are similarities in your concern, especially because these countries are middle-income countries. So the implementation of market-based programming, although, like Sunny mentioned, might be easier because of a good supply chain system, but you might get into social safety net issues in competition. So that's something we could work on and unpack with you if necessary. So if there's no further questions or comments, we will proceed to the last part of the webinar. And it's a small poll. As I've told you, we'd like to provide more personal support, and I just would like to know who would like to be contacted for further discussion on this. Don't be shy, feel free to say no if you're too busy or you think you can handle this at national or regional level. But if you think we could have an added value in looking at your issues, please feel free to say yes, and I guarantee we will reach out to you. We'll have at least a 1-hour discussion on to look at the challenges more in depth, and then we will coordinate with any possible support we can provide, either from the Global WASH cluster internally or from other experts in the field of the challenge that you have. Okay, so we have Venezuela interested. Very good. I'll write that down immediately. And if you answer the poll, it will be easier so I can keep track of who needs what. But good old paper works as well. So you have a poll, I think, popping up on your screen in normally several languages. Is the question showing up in French and Spanish as well?
On the PowerPoint slide, there's a limit on.
Right, okay, and then, sorry, okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
so,
I think though we have 7 respondents.
Good, can we show that as a conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, yay, 75% said yes, so great. So do we know which countries actually answered yes, Nicole?
We'll have to look on the back end afterwards.
Okay, great. Okay, so we will look into this and get back to you in a few coming weeks. I think next week, if possible, and the week after, just to have a preliminary discussion on this. Thank you so much. So Colombia is putting in the chat as well. Thank you so much for your attendance. I know it was a longer webinar than we thought, but with the interpretation and the group work, took a bit of time. So I really appreciate for those who stayed until the end. And we're looking forward to continue these discussions in a bilateral way so that we can have more impactful feedback and support. If there's no further question or comments from anyone, I think we can close the webinar. We still have 5 minutes to take more questions or comments. All right, then, if that's it, thank you very much again, and talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Have a good day.
Thanks
Bye.
to Dana as well, and the team of ProWash for their support. Absolutely essential. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.